Hello, and welcome to Historical Nights. Tonight, as the world slows around you, as your thoughts grow quieter, and your eyes perhaps begin to grow heavier, we invite you to step into the serene world of history. Not the stormy chapters full of clashing empires and battle cries, but the quieter ones. The ones where time itself feels as though it has slowed, where the rhythm of daily life, the hush of corridors in old palaces, and the fading heartbeat of an age, carry us gently into sleep. Tonight's journey takes us into the twilight of a reign that reshaped the world. The final years of Queen Victoria, sovereign of the British Empire, widow in deep black, grandmother to Europe, and a woman increasingly at odds with the modern world that was beginning to take shape around her. We will begin, as always, with immersion, inviting you to inhabit the spaces, textures, and sounds of everyday life in the last years of the Victorian era. From the creaking of servants' boots on stone corridors, to the muted rustle of a newspaper in a London drawing room. Then, we will gently shift to the woman herself, Victoria. Not the towering monarch, but the aging queen. Reflecting, withdrawing, observing from Windsor Castle and Osborne House, as her empire and her family evolved around her. We will explore cultural curiosities and archaeological developments of her time, quiet revolutions in thought and science happening just beyond her reach. The Victorian fascination with death, the birth of spiritualism, and the peculiar rituals of mourning will gently unfold before us. And finally, we will turn to contrast. What was life like not for the monarch, but for those around her, for the aristocrats navigating a fading world of rigid manners, and for the working poor, struggling against coal soot and clockwork time in the growing cities of the empire? So settle in. Let your breath slow. And imagine yourself drifting gently through the veils of history. Let us begin. Oh, and if you're enjoying these stories, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. I am super curious where you're all listening from. So, drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Always blows my mind how people are falling asleep to this all over the world. Now, imagine yourself standing at the edge of a cobbled lane in a quiet English village at the very end of the 19th century. The sun is low on the horizon, casting long amber rays across the chimneys and hedgerows. A thin trail of wood smoke rises from a cottage nearby, merging with the slight mist that always seems to cling to these damp, sleepy corners of the countryside. A cart creaks slowly past, its wheels groaning under the weight of milk churns, pulled by a patient, aging horse. The driver lifts his cap to a passerby, who nods silently in return, the exchange brief, unhurried, part of a rhythm long established. The village smells faintly of earth and chimney soot, and in early spring, of turned soil. A slow clock chimes the hour. 5 o'clock. Time for tea, or the closing of a shop shutter. In homes both humble and grand, the daily pattern is shaped by the dependable rituals of Victorian life. The day begins early. In great houses, servants are already awake before dawn, their tasks quiet but endless, kindling fires in cold hearths, polishing boots, preparing trays of weak tea and hard toast for the early rising master or mistress. Upstairs, rooms are still cold even under thick quilts and velvet drapes. Light filters dimly through heavy lace curtains. Coal scuttles are replenished in silence. There is no radio, no hum of machines, only the faint shuffle of footsteps on floorboards and the sound of the fire catching. In towns and cities, the streets slowly fill. London is ever-changing now. Horse-drawn omnibuses share the roads with the first motorcars, their odd sputtering noises drawing mild curiosity. The clatter of hooves, the soft tapping of walking canes, and the rustle of newspapers blend into a dull hum of human movement. The paperboy calls out the morning headlines. His voice is reedy, nearly lost in the morning fog. Queen Victoria is still on the throne, her jubilee just passed, and the newspapers speak often of her declining health in respectful, guarded tones. The Queen's constitution remains delicate, they say. The nation listens but does not panic. She has always been there. In the markets, food is plentiful but often plain. Oat porridge, mutton, pickled vegetables, white bread thick with lard or dripping. For the working class, meals are functional, warm, filling, sustaining. For the upper class, breakfast is an affair of poached eggs, grilled kidneys, tea poured from silver pots, and dishes served on warmed plates by hands that must not speak. Throughout all levels of society, time is the quiet master. Victorian life is governed by clocks, railway timetables, factory bells, school chimes, and church peals. Even in rural areas, where tradition once dictated pace, the empire's pulse now beats in sync with minute hands and ticking gears. Afternoons are subdued. Children, whether at school or under a governess's watch, learn scripture, manners, Latin, and moral tales. Women sew, write letters, manage households, or, if wealthy, read aloud in salons softened by the scent of rose water and beeswax polish. Men return to ledgers, meetings, or the privacy of club chairs surrounded by cigar smoke and quiet conversation. Imagine now a late afternoon in Windsor Castle. A grand but aging residence. Outside, the grounds are clipped and perfect. Within, it is hushed. The Queen is not often seen, but her presence is known, imprinted in the protocols that guide every movement of her staff. Her meals are served at precise times. No one may sit in her presence unless given permission. Her morning attire remains unchanged, a quiet testament to a loss felt decades past. Gas lamps flicker softly in the corridors as twilight falls. The Queen's dogs shuffle gently across thick rugs. Footmen in powdered wigs and high collars glide silently between chambers. The scent of lavender polish and old parchment lingers in the corners of unused rooms. For the average citizen, evenings are quieter still. Families gather around coal stoves. Shadows stretch long across worn wooden floors. The sound of piano practice filters through narrow streets. A child recites verses from memory. A kettle whistles gently. Some towns now have electric light, flickering weakly in the gloaming, but most homes are still lit by oil lamps or gaslight, their golden glow deepening the darkness beyond. The flicker casts slow-moving shadows against wallpaper patterned with ivy, fern, or classical designs. As night deepens, the world becomes wrapped in stillness. The empire is vast, stretching across continents, but here, in the snug corners of home, the pace of life contracts inward. Even the mighty British lion must eventually sleep. You may imagine yourself now in a soft bed beneath layers of wool and linen, the muffled quiet of a late Victorian night wrapped gently around you. Outside, a night watchman taps his stick on the cobblestones, a holdover from older times. A clock strikes 9. Then 10. The fire dies down. The lamp is extinguished. The house settles with the faintest groan of old timber. And slowly, softly, all the world seems to fall still. And now, having wandered through the fading light of late Victorian daily life, let us turn our thoughts to the woman at its very center. Queen Victoria herself, her habits, her solitude, her final reflections in the last seasons of her long, remarkable life. Imagine, if you will, a queen, once the figurehead of an age, now an elderly woman wrapped in black crepe and lace, moving slowly through the long corridors of Windsor Castle. It is the year 1897. The air within the castle is cool and dry. The stone walls retain the chill even in summer. Queen Victoria is 78 years old now. Her eyesight has dimmed. Her hearing, once so keen, now requires assistance. Her once imperious figure has softened with age. She walks with difficulty, often supported by a cane or a loyal attendant, yet her mind, sharp, shrewd, and ever observant, remains a vital force. She is, by now, an institution. Most of her subjects have never known another monarch. Her silhouette, small and round, is as familiar as the lion and the Union Jack. Her face graces coins and postage stamps. Her name defines the era itself, Victorian. But beneath the crown and the centuries of ceremony, she is, above all, a widow. It has been nearly 4 decades since the death of her beloved husband, Prince Albert, and still she mourns. Every day, in quiet rituals, in the careful preservation of his rooms, in the placement of his portrait beside her bed, she honors his absence. His dressing gown still hangs in its place. His shaving set remains untouched. Queen Victoria once wrote, "My life as a happy one is ended." And yet, life continues. Each day follows a carefully managed routine. She rises late, often around 9 in the morning, helped by her attendants. Her rooms are kept dim, her diet plain. She takes breakfast alone, tea, perhaps a soft egg, toast. Letters are brought in shortly after. She reads with care, making notes, giving instructions. Her handwriting has grown shakier, but her resolve is unshaken. By late morning, she attends to the red boxes, those unmistakable symbols of governance. Inside are state papers, foreign dispatches, and briefings from ministers. Even in advanced age, she reads nearly everything herself. Her sense of duty is absolute. She may not always approve of her ministers, particularly the younger, more reform-minded ones, but she never fails to engage with their reports. Her personal staff walk lightly, speak softly. Life in the Queen's inner circle is one of discretion and predictability. Victoria dislikes surprises. She prefers old faces, known voices, familiar silences. The world outside may be shifting, telephones, electric lights, motorcars, but within the Queen's presence, time obeys her pace. In 1897, Britain celebrates her Diamond Jubilee, a rare and grand occasion marking 60 years on the throne. The celebrations stretch across the globe. From Canada to India, Australia to South Africa, subjects of the British Empire raise toasts and sing hymns. In London, a grand procession winds its way through cheering crowds. The Queen, too frail to walk the route, rides in an open carriage, her face solemn and unmoved, but her presence alone stirs deep emotion. She wears black, as she always does. And though her body is diminished, her title is expanded: Empress of India, Matriarch of Europe, Mother of the Empire. And yet, away from the pageantry, her letters from this period reveal a woman feeling increasingly apart from the world she rules. She writes often of her ailments, swollen legs, painful joints, sleeplessness. She suffers from cataracts, rendering even her beloved journal-keeping more difficult. Her walks grow shorter, her travels fewer. When she retreats to Balmoral or Osborne House, she finds solace in solitude, in the quiet companionship of servants and animals, in landscapes that remind her of youth and Albert. She is not entirely alone. Her family is vast, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, though she is often distanced from them by etiquette, language, or politics. She writes to them, advises them, criticizes gently. Many of her descendants now sit on European thrones, making her the so-called grandmother of Europe. But even in their presence, she remains reserved. The figurehead of the family. A constant. Not quite mother, not quite monarch. Something in between. One figure does stand out in these later years, Abdul Karim, the Indian attendant who became her confidant and teacher. Known as the Munshi, he shared language lessons with the Queen, brought news of India, and offered companionship in a way few others could. Their relationship sparked controversy among the household. Many disapproved. But Victoria stood firm. She valued loyalty, and in Abdul Karim she found it. In her later journals, she mentions him with warmth, describing their long talks and his gentle ways. Her relationship with Karim echoed, in some ways, the earlier connection she had with John Brown, the Scottish servant who had also offered companionship after Albert's death. Both men reminded her, perhaps, of a world beyond the stiffness of court life. A simpler loyalty. A reminder that she was more than a sovereign. She was a woman who grieved, who needed kindness, who sought warmth in a life grown cold with loss. As the new century approached, Victoria found herself increasingly withdrawn. The Second Boer War had broken out in South Africa, and while she supported it publicly, she was privately concerned by the violence and strain it placed on the nation. She had lived long enough to see the empire reach its peak, but also to sense the tension beneath it. The world was shifting beneath her feet. Her final Christmas was spent at Osborne House in 1900. The weather was gray and heavy with rain. The Queen, now 81, was visibly frail. Her appetite had waned. She required assistance to sit upright. Yet she remained mentally alert, reading reports, attending small meetings, writing notes in her famously neat, slanted script. In early January of 1901, she grew weaker. Her doctors recorded that she seemed drifting. She spoke less, ate little. Family were summoned to her side. The rooms were hushed. Outside, the winter sea lapped softly at the edges of the Isle of Wight. The Queen lay in her bed, beneath layers of white linen, her hand resting on letters and photographs of Albert. She did not cry out. She did not protest. She simply began to let go. On January 22, 1901, Queen Victoria died. The precise moment is recorded with the care afforded to sovereigns. She passed at 6:30 in the evening. Her son, Edward, stood beside her. A new century had dawned. A new reign began. Victoria's body was dressed in white, not black. In her hand, a lock of Albert's hair. Beside her, a ring that had belonged to John Brown. Her final resting place was beside Albert, in the Frogmore Mausoleum. At last, she returned to him. And so passed the longest reigning monarch Britain had ever known, until a future queen, her great-great-granddaughter, would echo her endurance. But Victoria's shadow remained long after. Her reign had defined an era. Her mourning had become a template. Her image, stern, diminutive, veiled, had become the very face of imperial dignity. And now, as we step away from the Queen's private world, let us turn to the curiosities of the age around her. The fascination with death. The spiritualist salons. The cultural currents swirling through late Victorian Britain, strange, symbolic, and quietly transformative. The final years of Queen Victoria's reign were not just a time of personal mourning and imperial grandeur, they were also a time of curious contradictions. An age where science and superstition walked hand in hand. Where mourning became fashion, and séances, an evening pastime. Where death was not shunned, but embraced, ritualized, aestheticized, even domesticated. Imagine yourself now, not in a royal palace, but in a comfortable London drawing room. The hour is late. A gas lamp flickers softly. Heavy drapes are drawn. A small group sits in a circle, gloved hands resting lightly upon one another's fingertips. In the center, a single candle. A hush falls over the room. Then, a whispered request. Is there anyone with us, tonight? This was the world of late Victorian spiritualism, a movement born of grief, popularized by mediums and mourning mothers, and quietly tolerated by many, including the Queen herself. Spiritualism in the 1890s was more than parlor entertainment. It was a way of grappling with loss in a world suddenly full of widows, orphans, and unanswered questions. The Industrial Revolution had brought prosperity, but also dislocation, disease, and early death. For many, traditional religion no longer seemed enough. Science could explain the stars, the tides, the composition of soil, but not the ache of a vanished child, or the shadowed silence left by a departed husband. And so they turned to new voices, mediums who claimed to speak for the dead. Clairvoyants. Table rappers. Women in dark veils who said they could summon the spirit of a lost son, a mother, a lover. Séances became common in middle-class homes. Newspapers advertised their services discreetly. Entire families might gather in quiet hope, waiting for a whispered message, a fleeting tap, a sign. Even Victoria herself was not untouched by the movement. Though she never publicly endorsed it, she is known to have consulted with spiritualists in the early years after Prince Albert's death. Her mourning was all-consuming, and within the soft boundaries of séance and symbol, she found a temporary solace. Mourning, in the Victorian sense, was not merely an emotion, it was a discipline. A code. A language of cloth and color, gesture and silence. The Queen wore black every day after Albert's death, from 1861 until her own passing in 1901. In doing so, she created a visual template for grief that filtered down through society. Ladies of fashion followed suit, donning full skirts of crepe and bombazine, black gloves, jet jewelry, and veils thick enough to obscure the eyes. Mourning periods were strictly timed, a full 2 years for a spouse, 1 year for a parent, 6 months for a sibling. The phases were marked by subtle shifts, from deepest black to softer grays and lilacs. Even stationery, parasols, and fans were made to conform to the codes of bereavement. Shops catered to mourners with entire sections devoted to funerary goods. Mourning gowns, memorial brooches, black-bordered handkerchiefs. Photography studios offered post-mortem portraits, in which the deceased were posed in lifelike positions, eyes sometimes painted open, hands folded, surrounded by flowers or family members. It was a way of preserving presence, just a little longer. And yet, amidst this heavy atmosphere of loss, the Victorian world was pulsing with curiosity. These were also the years of extraordinary archaeological discovery, of intellectual restlessness, and of cultural expansion. In 1898, just 3 years before the Queen's death, an extraordinary discovery was made in Egypt, the tomb of Amenhotep II was uncovered in the Valley of the Kings. Though not as sensational as the later discovery of Tutankhamun, it captured the imagination of the British public. Newspaper illustrations showed golden sarcophagi, painted walls, hieroglyphs gleaming with ancient mystery. Egypt, land of the pharaohs, the afterlife, and monumental silence, seemed to echo the Victorians' own fascination with what lay beyond death. Museums in London began to swell with artifacts, mummies, stelae, ceremonial jars. The British Museum expanded its collections, and the public, walking its echoing halls, gazed with solemn wonder at the preserved fragments of civilizations long past. There was, beneath it all, a subtle kinship. The Victorians, like the ancient Egyptians, believed in the power of ritual, of remembrance, of symbols that might bridge the gap between this world and the next. Even in literature and art, death was rarely far. Poets wrote of ghostly figures, of graves kissed by ivy and moonlight. Painters captured scenes of twilight and sorrow, ships vanishing into fog, lovers parting at railway platforms. Popular magazines printed serialized tales of haunted mansions, cursed portraits, and mysterious visitors who vanished with the dawn. The Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, active since the mid-century, left a lingering visual language of long-haired maidens, wilting lilies, and pale, introspective saints. Their paintings often dwelled in that space between life and loss, fragile, romantic, and quietly melancholic. Even children's literature, ostensibly innocent, was marked by an awareness of mortality. Think of Peter Pan's Lost Boys, or the wistful endings of fairy tales in which characters often faded, transformed, or simply disappeared. Death was not hidden from the Victorian child, it was explained gently, wrapped in parables and dreams. And yet, alongside these intimations of mortality, the Victorian world also looked forward. Science, though often in tension with spiritualism, made quiet strides. In these same years, the first X-rays were taken, peering into the body's hidden architecture. The first Nobel Prizes were awarded. Sigmund Freud published The Interpretation of Dreams, opening the door to a new kind of mystery, the human mind itself. The tension between the known and the unknown, the visible and the veiled, defined these final Victorian years. People dressed in mourning but believed in progress. They feared ghosts but built factories. They read scripture and Darwin. The world was, in many ways, standing on a precipice, feet planted in the ritual-laden soil of the 19th century, eyes glancing toward the flickering, electric light of the 20th. And as Queen Victoria's reign slowly closed its final curtain, the age around her whispered not in clamor, but in quiet contradiction. Science and séance. Machinery and mourning. Decay and discovery. And so, we drift now from this world of symbols and shadows, of veils and velvet, and into the contrasting spheres of privilege and poverty. What was life like for the aristocrat and the laborer in these twilight years of empire? What rhythms guided their days? What hopes warmed their hearths? Let us now step softly into that contrast, into drawing rooms and tenements, parlors and factory floors, and listen to the quiet beating of lives so different, yet woven into the same fabric of time. The year is 1900. The century is folding in on itself. The Queen is frail, the world around her restless and changing. But for most people, life is still shaped not by empires or jubilees, but by the steady pull of daily survival. And nowhere is the contrast sharper than between the rich and the poor. Between the polished marble of Mayfair townhouses, and the soot-stained brick of East End tenements. Let us begin in a place of quiet affluence. Imagine yourself in the upper hall of a London townhouse. The morning light falls through tall windows framed by velvet drapes. There is the soft clink of porcelain on a breakfast tray, the faint creak of polished floorboards. A maid, eyes lowered, steps quietly past with a letter on a silver salver. This is the world of the British elite. Not royalty, but the gentry, the aristocracy, the great landowners and financiers. They live in both town and country, grand estates in Hampshire or Yorkshire, and refined flats or homes in the fashionable districts of London, Belgravia, Kensington, Mayfair. Their days are ordered. Breakfast is served at 8 or 9, depending on fashion and the household. Ladies sip tea, perhaps nibble on toast or fruit. Gentlemen read the Times, glancing over headlines about the Boer War, new trade ventures, or the Queen's health. By late morning, the house is gently astir. Servants polish silver and decant wines in the cellar. A butler oversees the scullery maid, the parlor maid, the cook, and footmen, each with roles defined by centuries of etiquette. Few words are exchanged beyond necessity. Deference is understood. Afternoons bring callers, other ladies of standing, gloved and veiled, arriving to leave cards and exchange soft compliments in overstuffed drawing rooms. Tea is served in delicate china, accompanied by cucumber sandwiches, biscuits, and polite, clipped laughter. In country houses, life follows the seasons. There is hunting in autumn, balls in winter, garden parties in spring. The days are not idle. There are estate accounts to manage, tenants to see, letters to write, but they are buffered by comfort. Fires are always lit. Meals are always hot. Illness is tended by private physicians. Silence is a luxury they can afford. Now imagine yourself far from these halls of wealth, just a few streets away, yet a world apart. Step quietly now into the narrow alleyways of Southwark, or Whitechapel, or Manchester's slums. The morning smells not of tea and warmed bread, but of coal smoke and damp wool. A single room might house a family of 5 or 6. The walls are papered with old newspapers, the floor scuffed and splintered. Clothes hang above the stove to dry. A rat scurries beneath a crate. The father rises before dawn. If he has work, it is at the factory or the docks. The mother stirs porridge made from water and oats, perhaps a crust of bread from yesterday. The children, if lucky, will go to school. Though many will be sent instead to hawk wares, to shine boots, or to help carry heavy bundles for pennies. There are no servants here. The mother cooks, scrubs, mends, and tends the young. Illness is common: scarlet fever, tuberculosis, influenza. When a child coughs at night, the parents listen with dread. The hospital is far, the cost unbearable. Yet even here, in hardship, there is rhythm. There is community. The factory bell rings, calling the workers. Laundry hangs in alleyways, a pale banner of endurance. Children chase one another between puddles. A neighbor knocks to borrow sugar. Hymns are sung on Sundays in chapels smelling faintly of damp hymnals and boiled wool. The contrast is stark. While the elite dine on venison and syllabub, the poor may share a bowl of stew between 7. While the privileged read novels in gaslit libraries, the working poor rest their eyes after 14-hour shifts, their hands blistered, their backs curved. And yet, both live beneath the same queen. Both read, in some form, the same news. Both feel the passing of time, the bite of winter, the hush of night. Children, in both worlds, play. Women, in both worlds, carry burdens, emotional, physical, social. And men, in both worlds, reckon with expectation and fatigue. There are others still, existing between the layers: clerks, governesses, shopkeepers, schoolmasters. The emerging middle class. They rent tidy flats. They subscribe to monthly journals. They wear respectable coats and speak with quiet correctness. Many believe in self-improvement, in savings, in progress. Their homes are small but orderly. Their values: Victorian to the core: discipline, modesty, industry. But even for the middle class, security is fragile. A father's death, a lost job, a lingering illness, and a family could slip quietly into poverty, unnoticed by the world around them. And yet, the spirit of charity endures. At Christmas, wealthier families donate baskets to the poor, filled with tinned meats, tea, and a coin or two. Soup kitchens ladle out thin broth. The Salvation Army marches with brass instruments, calling for hope. And reformers, quiet, determined, often women, begin to push for change. Improved housing. Child labor laws. Education for all. The Queen, in her last years, is far from these streets. Yet reports are brought to her. And though distant, she is not indifferent. She donates quietly to hospitals. She reads accounts. She expresses concern. And still, the gap remains. As wide as any sea. Let us return now to nightfall. In Belgravia, a lady in satin closes her diary, places it beside a lavender sachet, and draws the curtain against the city lights. In Whitechapel, a boy curls beneath a coat too thin for the cold, listening to the distant clatter of hooves. Both are children of Victoria's empire. Both live beneath the same sky. And both, in their own way, are part of the long, slow turning of an age. As the curtain gently closes on these contrasting lives, as the coal fires burn down to embers and footsteps fade into the cobbled night, we prepare now to leave the world of Queen Victoria behind. To close this journey, let us gently reflect on the passing of an era, and the comfort of knowing that, while the past may fade, its quiet echoes can still be heard, in moments of stillness, and in stories whispered through time. Now, let your mind drift, not forward, not backward, but somewhere still. You have walked through the hush of royal corridors and the crowded silence of slums. You have followed a queen through her final years, felt the weight of her routines, her grief, and the echoing steps of empire beneath her feet. And though Victoria's world has long since passed, its traces remain, quietly, subtly, in the rhythms of modern life. In the names of hospitals and railway stations, in the shape of city parks, in the shadow of courtly rituals that still persist, and in the muted dignity of black worn in mourning. Think for a moment of how long she reigned. 63 years. When she ascended the throne, the world moved by horse and sail. By the end, it was trains, steamships, and telegraphs. Cities had swelled. Colonies had expanded. Children who were born at the start of her reign grew old beneath her steady rule. And when she died, many wept, not only for the Queen herself, but for the passing of time. For the end of something known, something vast and slow and deeply familiar. She had become a fixture. Like the moon above the Thames. Always there. Always distant. Not beloved by all, perhaps. But known. And that, in the end, may be her legacy, constancy. In an age of invention, she was unchanging. In a century of noise, she was silence. In a time of spectacle, she was shadow. Even now, more than a century later, her image is preserved not just in statues and coins, but in something deeper, in the quiet resilience of institutions, in the soft manner of public grief, in the long patience of a people who endured so much change under the gaze of one monarch. Imagine her now. Not as the young queen, crowned in 1837. Not even as the middle-aged matron in mourning lace. But as she was in her last days, seated by the window at Osborne, her lap warmed by a spaniel, her fingers wrapped around a letter from a grandchild, her thoughts turned inward, and westward, toward the setting sun. There is a kind of peace in that image. A stillness. A closing of the book, rather than the extinguishing of a flame. And as you, dear listener, rest now in your own stillness, let that sense of closure, of long memory and quiet dignity, settle softly around you. The world is different now. The gas lamps have gone dark. The mourning veils have been folded away. The empire has faded into history. And yet, in this quiet moment, as you lie in the hush of your own room, with the gentle sounds of night all around you, you share something with those who lived then. The need for calm. For rhythm. For warmth. For stories that lull, rather than excite. Queen Victoria's story is not one of fireworks or fanfare. It is one of endurance. Of routine. Of adaptation wrapped in tradition. And in that, there is something comforting. Something human. So rest now. Let the names and years blur softly in your mind. Let the grand halls and narrow lanes fade to quiet. Let the Queen sleep, as she did that night in January, beneath white linens, with her husband's ring clasped gently in her hand. The clocks still tick. The past is still with us. But for now, sleep well. Good night.